Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy and Chris Jackson. Gentlemen, going to be a bit of a quicker episode today on Monday as we have to hunker down this afternoon to vote on our second all-area basketball teams. Obviously going to devote plenty of time to that today, but nevertheless wanted to, devote the podcast to talking a little bit of a close to basketball coverage with the playing of the state girls basketball tournament over the weekend. And then, you know what, we can do a little bit of just an all-area basketball primer, just kind of what we've got in store this afternoon. Chris, you were right there in the trenches, man. You were right there at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio for the last 2 days of the state basketball tournament. In a tournament, I should say, of the three teams that you covered out there, Frisco Liberty, Argyle, McKinney, you kind of got to see just the gamut of emotions that can come with high school sports. And that's the unique thing about sports, is that with all of the legwork and the time that these players, these coaches, the parents, everybody puts into this whole thing, you can see just how much it means there at the very end, with the state tournament sort of being a culmination of all that. And no matter what the outcome is, you can just see how much it means to these kids. And you got to kind of see between our three schools that were out there, just again, the gamut of emotions, from the highest of highs with Frisco Liberty to a team in McKinney that was, even in defeat, really kind of showed itself as being showed that they belonged on that stage despite long odds and whatnot, and being sort of an improbable state tournament qualifier. And then you had just the heartbreak with how Argyle's season had to end. So we'll talk a little bit about all three of those teams, and we can start right at the very top with the first ever state basketball champion from Frisco ISD, Liberty. The Lady Redhawks got it done in a game that looks just like your typical Liberty girls basketball game, 35-26 over Veterans Memorial in the state championship game, and the Lady Redhawks hoist the 5A state title. So Chris, you were right there, man. So just what was your takeaway from that game and seeing what Liberty was able to do to get over that hump?
That's just what Liberty wanted to do, was slow that game down, especially against Veterans Memorial up from San Antonio. And look at the final score, 35-26. After giving up 11 points in that first quarter, which is pretty much a high-flying day, I guess, for an opponent in the first quarter there with 11 points. But after that, 2 points in the second, 5 in the third, 8 in the fourth. And they weren't getting a whole lot of shots up either. That's the difference. Frisco Liberty's defense did come to play when they had to, but that offense was so patient. They were not chucking up any bad shots, not rushing it. They were patient. They got the job done. They won by 9. And look, after that first quarter, they go down 11-6. They have 9, 6, and 14. That was a great fourth quarter. They had to finish that game, but Liberty just played a great game all around. They deserve that. All the girls stepped up like they had to. Jazzy Owens-Barnett, in particular, the MVP award, very deserving, running the show, grabbing rebounds. I lost count of how many fouls she drew, honestly. She played physical, and she deserved all those foul calls. She played a great game, deserved an MVP.
Starting off slow in the first quarter of playoff games was nothing new for Liberty. They were down 7-0 in the first round of Lovejoy.
It is crazy to think now in hindsight, the state champions began their postseason with a scoreless first quarter. Yeah. Surely that's the first time that's ever happened, right?
I'm assuming so.
It has to be.
Against Midlothian in the regional final, they were losing 4-2 at the end of the first quarter. Starting off slow was nothing new for this team. They had the same blueprint, make the adjustments. Second quarter, especially coming out of the second half, really take over and let their defense do the talking. And every game was the same. The same style of play. They didn't subject themselves to another team's style of play or playing someone else's game. They did what they know how to do. Timely, big-time shots from girls like Maya Jane and Lily Zinkowitz. I think she had a bunch of threes this past weekend.
Yeah, she had a huge state semis game. I think she scored 16 that game.
Yes.
She didn't have to score a whole lot in the state championship game, but if they don't get to that state championship game, it's not for her in that semifinals game. They won by 3 in overtime. She hits the go-ahead 3. She scores 16. So she deserves a lot of credit as well.
Yeah, and then just suffocating opponents, down the stretch. And then when they need a bucket, Jazzy Owens-Barnett's there, and she is a walking bucket. And some other programs, maybe she averages 20, 30 points per game, but she doesn't have to. With this team, with the style of play, how slowed down things are. But it's just so impressive, that Liberty, of all, no offense to this Liberty team, but, not much experience. A lot of sophomores, a lot of juniors.
This wasn't a team that carried itself with state championship caliber expectations coming into this season.
No, Coach Ross Reedy told me multiple times, he was like, I thought we were maybe the 5th best team in this district, heading into the season. It's like, okay, well, then you go win the state title? And I remember, they were, when they beat Lone Star the first time, the game when Kyla Deck hit that crazy shot to force overtime, And then they eventually went on to win. I think they were 10-0 after that game. Reedy told me, he was like, yeah, because I think it was my first time seeing them play. He's like, yeah, not a lot of people thought we were going to be good anyways either. So and they were 10-0, and then they go win the district title, and the rest is history.
It is just wild that, like you mentioned, just no matter what your tempo is, no matter what your style of play is, how there's just, you don't have a choice when you play Liberty. No matter what, you're going to play at just the most grinding tempo. It's going to be so uncomfortable, and it was the main thing that stuck out last year, getting to see this team in the state championship game against Amarillo with all that program stands for and whatnot. And even for 3 quarters now, Amarillo finally did get a little bit of separation there in the fourth, but for 3 quarters, like, the game was being contested 100% on Liberty's terms. It's just so patient. It's so methodical how they work for high efficiency shots. And I mean, again, like, you could maybe try to speed them up, maybe throw double teams their way, or just try to do whatever you can to try to get some turnovers, maybe, speed up the tempo and ignite your transition game. But you just aren't able to do that against Liberty because they're just, and it requires players that are high IQ and just, and whatnot, and know how to, to not make those mistakes in half court, that play with a patience and a calmness to themselves. And yeah, I mean, it's wild. I mean, just got some numbers here. The 26 points allowed against Memorial, that was the fewest they allowed in the entire postseason. So to save that effort for the state championship game, all too timely there. Their 9-point margin of victory was their largest since the area round against South Oak Cliff. Everything else, though, had been like a 1-point win over Centennial, or a 3-point win here, a 4-point win there.
2 different overtime games also.
Yes. And then it was the 16th time all season that they've held an opponent below 30 points. I mean, just, again, that's when you factor in, again, just the average then per quarter. That is just nuts.
I mean, you go off it, too. Speaking of those slow starts, I mean, not to have a point in the first quarter earlier this year, to start off slow like they did in the first quarter of the state championship game, it just speaks about the composure, which Ross Reedy talked about after that game. No matter what happens early on, these girls just fight their way back. They don't get rattled by anything. And look what happened the rest of the way in the state championship game.
And they were ranked 24th in Class 5A?
The disrespect. Yeah, 24th, and here they are.
Number 1 at the end of the season.
Number 1.
That's wild.
I would love to see this year's team play last year's team that almost won it all with all seniors.
Because wasn't last year's team like a team that was kind of building up towards the chance to win a state title? Like, that was a group that had so much more experience and they'd been through those battles and whatnot. And then this team is the one that gets over the hump. Just wild. What a run. What a run for the Lady Redhawks. Frisco Liberty hoists a Class 5A state championship. Let's see. Let's talk about McKinney. It was sort of kind of the surprise entrant over in the Class 6A draw, whereas you had, undefeated Cypress Creek. You had the defending state champion Converse Judson, and then you had mighty Duncanville, number 1 ranked, going for their 11th state championship. And then you had McKinney making its first appearance in over 2 decades, despite finishing 3rd in their own district. So you weren't really sure what to make, if they were just a team that kind of got hot at the right time. And then after the fact, to see what it all means, when having to go up against, state ranked teams, like when they beat Harker Heights and then they beat Plano. I mean, just two quality programs. But okay, how are you going to handle just the pressure that comes with being on that stage for the very first time? And it sounds like, Chris, that like even in defeat, they showed about as well as you possibly could, considering the stature of their opponent, who was undefeated at the time.
I mean, they could have honestly won that game too. That's the thing. McKinney played such a great game. The only difference was Cypress Creek came in to that game 40-0, number 12 in the country by max preps, and McKinney is a 3 seed out of its own district. Makes this run to the state championship game. And sure, they lost, but they were just so happy they got to this point, what they did, what they accomplished. Because if you look at it, what were the odds of them actually making it this far? When you're a 3 seed, you're not going to get easy matchups. And they made it this far. They came within 3 points of winning this game. They started off hot, too. They really did. They started off on a big run. They had a 4-point lead after the first quarter, but Cypress Creek is a Cypress Creek. There's a reason why they were 40-0 and why they're top 15 in the country. They came out with that win, but McKinney had a chance at the end there, too, where we thought one of those last 2 threes was going to go in.
Really?
From my seat, it looked like it was online. It just couldn't go down the net, but that still a heck of a season for them.
Because you see, I mean, it sounds like because McKinney's kind of they've hung their hat on defense all postseason. I mean, they won the regional final against Plano 32-28.
So Frisco Liberty game.
Obviously, this game got a little bit further away from that. I'm not sure if McKinney necessarily wanted this game to be in the 50s, but I mean, nevertheless, they still did a pretty solid job defensively, with the exception of Kendall Hunter. It sounds like she just went nuts for Cy Creek.
I mean, and it wasn't like the most efficient night for her ever, but she's still going to get buckets. She's still going to make shots. I mean, she was taking threes 4 or 5 feet behind the line and making them. It was like a high school version of Steph Curry in a way. Almost looked a little bit like a Sabrina Ionescu out there.
Oh, yeah?
A little bit.
Okay. Because, you look defensively, I mean, they held Cy Creek to just 38% from the field. And, again, you mentioned Kendall Hunter. I believe her final numbers were, I think it was like 11 of 25 shooting. Mm-hmm. She was only 2 players on that team converted more than 1 field goal.
Exactly.
So they did, again, they tried to, whether it was the case of just let her get hers and let's just dare everyone else to beat them and whatnot. But still, McKinney they show well in taking an undefeated team down to the wire like that. And like you said, this was a 3-point game inside the final, the closing moments with a chance at the tie. What was kind of the scene afterwards in the press conference, just for a team that, again, like I'm sure they, once they got far enough, I'm sure that it began to feel real. But who knows, at the start of the postseason, when they're going back and forth with Lakeview Centennial in a game that they very well could have lost, if it seemed like, okay, we have enough in the tank to maybe make a run to San Antonio. What was the scene like afterwards in that presser as they were just kind of reflecting on their season?
Obviously, you're going to be emotional after you lose a game and your season ends with a loss, but as they reflected, as head coach Deb Harris reflected too, she was just so proud of this team and what they did. They had great leadership. They had all these different girls step up throughout the tournament. And just the way they came together as one too, because like I said a couple minutes ago, to go from a 3 seed and you're out of your own district to state semis in 6A is really impressive. Sure. That it was more of just they were proud to even be here and represent their community like this. And sure, it's tough when you lose a game like that. Like I said, you never want to end your season with a loss. But if you think about it in this grand scheme of things, she still called them champions. She still called them winners because to go to that far to be the top 4 team there at the end with the teams you mentioned, like a Duncanville, a Cypress Creek, a Converse Judson, that speaks to just how good you are.
I think this is the second time in the last calendar year that McKinney ISD has had a team that finished 3rd in its own district advance to the state tournament, because I believe that's where the Boyd baseball team finished last spring when they made their improbable run to state. So, who knows? Maybe it's just a good luck thing, finishing 3rd in your district. That's crazy. But, yes, what a season for the Lionettes as they advance to the state semifinals. And then we can talk about, you talked about reasons to be proud in the face of defeat, and surely there's plenty over the years that Argyle can look back on and be incredibly proud of, because this is one of the all-time great runs in Texas high school basketball. Again, they'll have time to reflect and look back on all that they've accomplished, but in the moment, though, man, that had to sting on Saturday. It
really did. You could see the emotions for Riley McKinney, those players up there at the podium. Head coach Chance Westmoreland started crying at the podium, too, when he reflected on this run. He hasn't been here for this entire 6-year run, but he's still been here for a few years, won a couple of state titles, but every great thing's got to come to an end eventually, right? That's just the way it was. But one thing I do want to say first, credit to those Argyle girls for even talking to the media after the game, because you can tell the emotions were high, and the last people they probably want to talk to after losing game like that, ending your career like that, 1-point game in overtime is to the media. Yeah. But they held their heads high. It's just a matter of it wasn't their second half. It wasn't their overtime. Fairfield, a lot of credit to them, too. Those girls went down big early. They're down 16-3 right away, but they stormed back. You almost thought Riley McKinney was going to win that game at the end, too.
Yeah.
Goes to the line, a few free throws, makes the first 2. Third one just didn't go down. Gets that putback, and you're thinking it's just going to end with McKinney ending her high school career with that thing going in.
It's the perfect storybook end to one of the most accomplished high school basketball careers.
Exactly. It didn't go in, but Argyle, to win 5 state titles in a row, to win 41 straight playoff games in a row, I don't care what level you're in, what state you're in, that's remarkable to do, especially in high school where you get so much turnover each season. It's just I can't even put it into words how that happens, but
because that's the thing. You're only in high school for 4 years, so it means that they started this run with an entirely different cast of players.
Yep.
And just see they've been able to keep this run going, and oftentimes having to go through, because there were years when they entered the postseason without being ranked number 1, like this year, for example, and they had to take down the number 1 ranked team. Like this year it was Canyon. They beat them in the regional tournament and whatnot. So then to see that they've just been able to stay so consistent over the years, and they've done it with injuries too. Because we've talked about it before. Sydney Standifer, arguably their best player, has missed these last 2 years, essentially missed these last 2 playoff runs because of a torn ACL. So, just still been able to, to keep it on track, and just the job that Riley McKinney did, just kind of putting that team on her shoulders time and time again. She ended up with 24 points per game during her postseason, and it sounds like she was just once again in rare form at the state tournament.
You saw the regional tourney; she drops 33 and 32 consecutive games. Remarkable,
including the first 26 points for Argyle in the regional finals.
How do you do that? How do you conceivably do that because you're thinking after you get 10 points in a row, those opponents, they're honed in on you for the rest of the game. But to score 26 in a row from one player. Now, I want to see what her and Tamia Jones from the Colony do at SMU because that's one heck of a tandem there.
So the Argyle dynasty, if this is in fact the end, now we don't know. We'll see obviously what next year brings, but obviously they do lose, some pretty impactful players, not just Riley McKinney, but Brooklyn Carl, and whatnot, players that have been through the, through those wars before. But the dynasty itself, as far as the consecutive title streak, it ends at 5, which is tied for the second most in UIL girls basketball history. A win on Saturday would have tied them for the top spot with Nazareth, who has 6 in a row. It is wild though, because you hear the cliche that all good things come to an end, but man, nobody deserves to have it all end that way.
It hurts. It hurts to see that. You could see the emotions, but we could say who knows what's going to happen next year. But the way Argyle's done it for the last 5-6 years,
who's to doubt them at the
exactly. Maybe they make another run, they come back and make it 6 out of the last 7 years.
It just shows the margin between happiness and heartbeat that exists in sports. And yes, unfortunately for Argyle, they after so much happiness and so much success, the ball just a couple fractions of an inch, and that thing probably swishes for Riley McKinney. You go into overtime, and at that point, who's betting against Riley finding a way?
Exactly. Because as soon as she puts it up, I'm thinking it's in. It's over. It's going to be 6 in a row. They're going to tie for the longest streak ever, but it just didn't go in. But even if it didn't go in, her career it's going to be defined by I don't even want to know how many career points she finished. Honestly, that's a statistic I need to know. But a heck of a run, a heck of a career regardless. Their head coach called it the greatest 3-year run.
Yeah, because he's only been there since 2017.
Coach, and did a heck of a job there. Now we'll see what they do in the future. But when they look back on it here, starting probably in a week or so, they're gonna look at that and be like, "Wow, we really did something that's been done before." Rarely at any level of high school sports.
So yes, that is a look back on the action that happened over the weekend in San Antonio at the State Girls Basketball Tournament. Going to shift gears, talk a little bit more basketball, just give you a little bit of primers to what we've got in store for our afternoon as we assemble our second ever all-area basketball team, and we will do that after a quick break. And we are back. We've got Devin, Hasson, and Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick all decked out in his LA Lakers gear after their big few days and whatnot. So we're going to, so we've already talked about the State Girls Basketball Tournament, and we can put that to rest. This afternoon, guys, though, we are voting on our second ever all-area basketball team and wanted to just use these last, few moments of the podcast as just sort of kind of a primer because, I don't know, I'm fascinated to see how this turns out just because I was looking over last year's compared to this year's. There's going to be some massive turnover. And I guess I didn't even realize it in the moment how much everything from graduations to injuries of of the 10 kids on our all-area girls basketball team last year that were picked for the first team or the second team, 9 of them graduated. And then you have cases where our all-area MVP, Jordan Oliver, she's obviously off at Baylor. Our 6th woman of the year, Sydney Adams of Allen, she's graduated. And then you have players like Jordan Merritt and Mackenzie Buss, who were Defensive Player of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, respectively. They essentially missed all year with injuries. So, the only holdovers from last year are Amaria Fields of McKinney North, Jules Spear of the Colony, who was our Offensive Player of the Year, and then Ross Reedy, Frisco Liberty. He was our Coach of the Year last year. So, again, who knows? I know. And that's part of the so if you're just looking at some of the because, all right, so how we do this is we have an MVP, we have an Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, and then we wanted just to think of something kind of a bit more off the beaten path. So we went last year, we went with, 6th man of the year and whatnot, decided to recognize a bench player. We can always decide if we want to keep that and whatnot because I know those bench stats are a little bit tougher to parse through, than it is for your players that are dropping 15, 20 a night and whatnot. The MVP discussion on both boys and girls are going to be fascinating because last year, I think it maybe took a combined 5 seconds for us to decide on our all-area MVPs. It was Jordan Oliver, yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Even though we had 3 All-Americans, she was from 3 McDonald's All-Americans, it felt like we were all kind of in concert with thinking Jordan Oliver was just a hair above the rest. And then we had R.J. Hampton on the boys' side. Yeah, you know what? Seems like a no-brainer. With this year, though, I have I have no idea, because you were mentioning, Kendrick, even whether it was in your area or mine or whatnot, there weren't a ton of players that just popped on the stat sheet and whatnot. There was a lot of teams that really kind of built their identities on balance.
Or kids that would they average 16, 17 points, but mainly it's how they played in the fourth quarter dictate if they had a good game or not necessarily putting up to 25 or I had E.J. Clark a couple years led the area in scoring. Every game he's going to put up 25, 30, so we didn't have all that this year.
The closest thing was probably Keontae George out in Louisville, and surely Keontae will be in consideration for our all-area.
Saw him as a freshman. He was really good there.
Oh, yeah. He's just as good as a sophomore. He's the number one player in the state for the class of 2021.
Not surprised.
Well,
or 2022, I should say.
Particularly on the girls' side, you have so many good coaches, so many good systems, and the way they run their programs doesn't allow for big numbers. You mentioned McKinney doing it, their way. Frisco Liberty, you talked about in the first segment the way they won that state championship. Saxey, one of my teams, they don't have a lot of girls that put up huge numbers. It's part of that system that Donna McCullough runs. That just wins. That's just what they do. And so, they don't have necessarily flashy numbers that they could put up in a different system, but they win. That's what's important.
But tell me this though: in the big picture, though, do system win or do players win? Because Duncanville don't have no system.
Both.
Let me have those players. I'll roll that dice.
Now, and you can basically out talent people, yes, but I think Duncanville's got an excellent coaching staff too. I mean those girls just don't roll the ball out there and say go do what you do. Those girls are very well disciplined. I was watching the games this weekend, and it takes more than just the talent.
Yeah. It's going to lead to, you mentioned the influence the coaching has on this, and that's going to lead to what I think is going to be one of the more spirited discussions this afternoon, is just how do we reach a consensus on who to pick for Coach of the Year, because we've got so many, like any other year, you can make a case for coaches like Rodney Belcher over at Plano to be able to make it to the regional finals after losing his best player.
You lose
so
to
early in the season.
All-America and then go to regionals.
You win district and whatnot. I mean, you're able to do all that, and but then you have Deb Harris with McKinney and the run that the Lionettes got on. Like, who could have foreseen the 3
with no
seed?
Stars. You had no superstar. You got a bunch of girls buying into the system, and the system got them there.
And then, of course, there's Ross Reedy, who was our Coach of the Year last year, but had an arguably better season this year as he got over the hump, losing 4 starters from last year's team, and then being able to get back, and not only get back, but win a state championship, the first ever Frisco ISD. So again, you just have to discuss kind of what criteria you value most, and obviously it leads to some pretty spirited debate between us and whatnot. But we eventually do reach the finish line one way or another. But yes, I think that the Coach of the Year discussion, especially on the girls' side, I'm very much looking forward to. On the boys' side, were there any names that jumped out? Was Zach Mikesell over at Saxey that got the nod? In years past, if I look at some of our other all-area Coach of the Years, like in football, Marcus Shavers got it last year. Jeff Rayburn got it this year. So again, you kind of had 2 different cases of perhaps the coach that did, that kind of came out of the blue, had to, perhaps the more surprising season versus the coach that, this year we recognize the coach who got his team, the furthest of everybody that we cover. So I don't know. It's just every case study is different. Were there any coaching jobs that kind of stuck out though on y'all's end as far as teams that maybe have whether it was a team that had a bit more success than you maybe expected or whatnot?
No, I mean not necessarily. I mean, but I think with Coach of the Year, you tend to lean toward two factors: championships, number one, but turnarounds. Yeah. That's you mentioned Zach Mikesell last year.
See, that was the turnaround.
Yeah, you added something. McKinney didn't make the playoffs last year. They didn't make the playoffs last year.
Okay.
He's
still on McKinney girls.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a very valid point, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is. No doubt.
Because we do tend to weigh turnarounds. Marcus Shavers, what he did, it's just there's different criteria, and we'll break it all down. But I think turnaround's a big aspect of it, especially if it's in your first year. I mean, if you've been at the program for 5 years, it's a little bit different because you know that the kids in freshman JV. To walk in your first year and completely change the atmosphere and to completely turn things around, I guess gets a little more credence in our eyes.
But I mean, a team like you mentioned McKinney, though, but on the boys' side, for them to have the year that they did with all of the young players and whatnot, surely that's got to reflect positively on Wes Watson.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's called them the kids, so the kids can play. But it's kind of hard that you take 2 sophomores and 2 freshmen, and you throw them in there from day one. It wasn't like they had a process. Because usually, I know Devin's seen this, like you hear about these kids that get hyped up, and then come district, they finally start showing up. They were there from day one.
For sure.
So he had a plan, and it worked, and it was very successful. And almost within the 3-point shot, got them to the quarterfinals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was one of those teams where I didn't necessarily look at the roster real quick. I mean, for the game, just to analyze it, I just saw, okay, they got freshmen, sophomores on the team, big deal. Yeah. There's playoff rosters expand anyway. And then as the game's going on, as I'm watching that game,
all these kids play.
I'm like, noticing, okay, he hit a 3, sophomore. He hit a 3, freshman. It's like that team's going to be scary in a couple of years.
Should have got him this year. I keep telling Matt and them, everybody should have got him this year because they're going to be tough to deal with next year.
Yeah, definitely will.
So let's see. As far as I don't know, I'm trying to think of where else I want to go with this. Let's see. As far as 6th man of the year, where did you guys stand kind of on that last year? Is that something you guys want to keep around for this year? Do we want to maybe think outside the box for a different, maybe offshoot superlative and whatnot? Or
it's tough to say because how do you define 6th man? Because there's a lot of guys.
It's more so he's the best bench player in our coverage area. Because obviously rotations can change and whatnot. So who knows? It's more just kind of the best bench standout. That we have.
Because you don't have the. In the NBA, it used to be real conventional. You had your 6th man that came off the bench.
Yeah.
But these days, you have guys that start half the time and don't start half the time. It's
like there's a certain criteria for the NBA. It's like you can only start like 30 games. Start more than 30 games. It's very particular. I have a vote in the NBA Writers Association for the awards. So I forget this exact numbers, 30 to 35, that you can only go. So there's a legit criteria. But I know what you're saying because you'll see some kid that's like, he didn't start the last 2 games and he plays the whole game from beginning to end when they play somebody big.
Just see some quick notes though on our boys basketball team as far as the turnover from there. As far as players that graduated, we had 4 of the 5 first team selections graduated. Only 2 of the 5 second team selections graduated, but our reigning MVP is currently overseas. Or at least played overseas for this season. Our offensive player of the year graduated. I believe that was Byron Scobie from McKinney. Yep, and then our defensive player of the year didn't play basketball this year. Brandon Frazier from McKinney North.
He was hurt though. He had off-season surgery before he signed with the War Eagles.
Last year's newcomer of the year, Keontae George, he's back, and like we mentioned, he'll be in consideration for either MVP, Offensive Player of the Year for something. Keontae's probably got a pretty big superlative coming his way. And then our 6th man of the year last year, Frisco Lone Stars, Andre Howard, he moved into the starting lineup and was either their leading scorer or their second leading scorer, so obviously no longer qualifies for that.
It's good to see people on the come up, though.
Oh, yeah. So it's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating to see how these discussions go. It's always, again, we're going to hunker on down in our sports office down the street, and it'll probably take a couple hours. Basketball tends to kind of go a little bit quicker than like football does, where you got so many different positions. And we keep it restrictive. So we have the kids, we have our superlatives and whatnot. Like I mentioned, there's 6 superlatives that we award, and then there's 5 first team and 5 second team. That's it. So
keep it real with them, man. Let them know you're not going to find another more accurate list than you are in the area than what we got. We don't make up stuff. It's very serious and it's very accurate. I challenge another publication to come up with a high school section that we came up with that's going to be as accurate.
Kendrick firing shots over here. So yeah, now the pressure's on us to release a damn good list this afternoon. So
that's what we do, though.
Yeah, we might as well get to it then. So yes, that is a look at what is in store this afternoon as we compile our second ever all-area basketball team. Should be fun. We'll have that stuff out, I guess, within the next 2-3 weeks after the fact. We'll keep you all apprised on social media as to when that will drop. Let's see. All right, so that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. Until next time, folks, you enjoy your week, and we will talk to you all later.